just done a little video about something that I hadn't heard of before, the mental health courts and drug courts, which is something they have in Idaho, and I believe there's other states that have these. It's supposedly to keep people out of prison and to give them, sounds like to give them treatment from what the legislation says. But here is a specific case. So this is from March 2023, 4:30 a.m. Audrey was up early writing this one. He's in a prison cell with no criminal conviction. Idaho put him there for mental health care. So Brad Little, the Idaho governor, is proposing a $24 million secure facility, one that isn't a prison. So the caption, and this is Idaho Maximum Security Institution. For years, Idaho has housed mental health patients who are deemed dangerously mentally ill in a prison complex south of Boise. The patients are in cells designed for inmates with felony convictions. So there's an update to this. The Idaho Legislature's Joint Finance Appropriations Committee on March 14th declined to take up Idaho Governor Brad Little's request to find a secure mental health facility for patients who are currently housed at the prison. In the sagebrush steppes south of Boise is a prison compound. In that compound is a maximum security prison for up to 549 inmates, surrounded by a double perimeter fence with razor wire and alarms. And in that prison is Ben, a man from rural North Idaho County who isn't serving a sentence or even facing criminal charges. Ben, who's in his 30s, is in a prison cell because he has a mental illness, and Idaho has no other safe place for him. There are 9 cells at the Idaho Maximum Security Institution for men like him, and 1 cell at a prison in East Idaho for women like him, deemed dangerously mentally ill, even though they haven't been convicted of a crime. Those beds are usually full, as patients stay for 4 to 6 months on average, according to Idaho's chief psychiatrist for corrections. Some of these Idahoans were charged with crimes, but their psychiatric disease is so severe that they can't stand trial without treatment. Others are facing no charges. A court placed them there under an involuntary mental health commitment because their psychiatric disease makes them a danger to themselves or others. Idaho Department of Corrections spokesperson Jeff Ray said in an email that referrals of patients to the prison have increased. Because the number of beds is capped at 9, admittance to the program is reserved for the most severe cases, and patients with less severe cases have to be sent elsewhere, he said. Idaho Governor Brad Little this year asked the Idaho legislature to fund a project that would house these Idahoans in a secure environment, not a prison, while they receive treatment. The Republican governor recommends that legislators approve $24 million for the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare to use for a secure forensic 26-bed mental health facility to care for patients committed and determined dangerously mentally ill by Idaho courts, and additional funding to pay for improvements to state-run mental health facilities in southwest and east Idaho. The The Joint Finance Appropriations Committee planned to take up that budget item last week, so it delayed its considerations, but it looks like it made up its mind in the end. The Idaho Maximum Security Institution opened in 1989 to confine Idaho's most disruptive male residents. Can you imagine what their mental health is like when they come out of here? I don't think it will have improved somehow. That doesn't usually describe Ben, said his mother Diane. The Idaho capital's son has chosen to use their first names only to protect Ben's medical privacy. When he's not hospitalised, Ben lives with his mother in the house where he grew up. He enjoys playing golf, mountain bikes, kayaks and snowboards. He and his mother take long road trips. He is a joy to live with when he's healthy, she said. He tried to go to college several times. He got straight A's, but the illness, his mother said. Ben was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. I also like to interject that I used to work with adults with mental illness, and I worked with a young man, he was about the same age as me at the time, with schizophrenia, and you wouldn't know that he had schizophrenia when he was on the medication that he was on. Unfortunately, it had really horrible side effects that made him put on a lot of weight and made him dribble when he spoke. He found it quite hard to keep his saliva in his mouth, and also it caused, which no young man wants, I can only think of a word that I don't want to say, sexual issues, sexual dysfunction basically, and all this young man wanted was a girlfriend. And I left that job. I was there when I was at uni. I'd sort of worked part-time there, and I'd just finished uni and I started working in a different job in a residential care home with sort of foster kids basically. But I used to keep in touch with people there, and really sadly, this young man who, my mum and dad met him and they just thought he worked there, and sadly he stopped taking his medication secretly. He'd be given his medication daily by somebody else, but he was obviously taking it out of his mouth. And it's not surprising, really. You just wouldn't want to be on this medication if you're like 20 years old and these things are happening. He'd said many times, he'd ask us about our lives, the staff that worked there, because he just wanted that life as well. He became dangerous when he stopped taking it, because he just got paranoid, delusional thoughts. And it's like, it's not something that people can control. It's like, I don't even know why it's called a mental illness. It's a brain disease, so for example, think about there's a condition called Cushing's disease, right? And that increases your cortisol levels, so that you have really high cortisol levels, and then you will have all different kind of symptoms, like putting on a lot of weight, and that would make you change your behaviour. That would make you find it quite. It also affects your sleep patterns and things. So it would. And you could think of that as behavioural if you want to, really, because it would cause mental health issues. And schizophrenia is no different. This is schizoaffective disorder, but I think it probably comes within the same, comes within that spectrum, and it's to do with something going on in the brain. I don't know specifically what, and maybe I don't know if they know specifically what, but you can't get control of your neurotransmitters, you can't control hormones, You don't always know what's going on in your body, and your brain is part of your body, and so it is a physical illness, despite people thinking it is a mental illness, because they think of how you behave, but it's not really. It's not. Mental suggests choice, and there isn't as much choice as you think for any of us. We are slaves to our neurotransmitters to a degree, and hormones and other substances in our bodies that we don't have any control over. And not all, I mean, in a way, that young man, at least when he did take medication, it worked, but that isn't always the case. Anyway, sorry, I thought I'd just sort of give a bit of personal experience, and I know it's something that's quite hard for people to understand, and people don't understand that people's minds can go, that paranoia and delusions aren't things that people can control. Ben was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder almost 20 years ago, she said. His doctors have prescribed him a variety of medication regimens over the years, but they do not always work. He's been hospitalised many times in state psychiatric hospitals and non-state-run hospitals. And just think if this was your son. It's just so sad. Some medications make him agitated, aggressive, assaultive, suicidal, all those kinds of things, instead of sedating him and helping him with psychosis. But who wants to be sedated all the time as well? Like, who wants to be like a zombie? I mean, that's just a terrible life. But psychiatric providers often try those medications with predictably bad results, she said. Instead of getting better, Ben lashes out. Anytime Ben is in a psychotic state and he sees anyone that looks like a policeman, he gets really afraid. And that's also how he responds to restraints or a needle, Diane said. And that's another thing that's not always understood, that agitation is not necessary. There's a special way to deal with somebody who's agitated. And like, there are triggers, like, people in uniform and things. And because somebody's acting a certain way, anxiety can be really misunderstood, like extreme anxiety. I myself can be really agitated when I've been extremely anxious, and that can be assumed to be me being extremely difficult. And actually, that was all related to hormones as well. And since that's been sorted out, I'm not having that agitation, and that was like a medical procedure that changed that. People don't quite understand, and if you just see somebody, you can easily make assumptions without knowing the full details anyway. His defensive reactions can be violent, and as a result, he was shipped for the first time to the Boise prison in 2017 to be housed with other dangerously mentally ill men. And I can tell you another thing, it's really frightening when you are in a crisis, and I have been in a crisis myself. It's really frightening to be around people who are mentally ill, or who are even just ill, because it's quite terrifying, actually. So being around people who are acting very oddly around you, that will really not help your mental state. He's now several months into his latest stay at the prison, and Diane does not know when or if he will leave. It makes me sick to think that he could end up dying there in a prison cell, she said. I mean, it makes me feel so sad because when I hear things like this, because I have a son, he's only just going into his teens, but to think that anything like this could happen to him is just heartbreaking. His mother is not surprised that a man with psychosis would be defensive and aggressive against people in police-like uniforms while he's locked in a prison cell. The uniforms are just one of the weak spots in the invisible line the programme attempts to walk between convicted and committed. Medical records are on a prison template with, for example, inmate name instead of patient. The Idaho Department of Correction confirmed that when the cells are not occupied by people who are there for mental health treatment, they're occupied by prison inmates. The other people housed in that part of the prison are on death row. Medical records provided to the son by Ben's mother show he was admitted last September after allegedly assaulting a nursing staff member about 10 days ago at a state-run psychiatric hospital. I must reiterate, and I have done so by phone several times to Health and Welfare, that this is an inappropriate place for this patient to be treated because it lacks the level of care that he requires, Ben's psychiatrist at the prison wrote on the 6th of September in a medical record from Ben's arrival at the prison. Although it's more secure than the state hospital, this patient requires more intensive treatment than is available here. The record said Ben arrived at the prison believing, among other things, that he had been kidnapped and sent to prison illegally. God, imagine how terrifying that is. The staff who write up Ben's progress notes refer to him as a patient or by his first name. I introduced myself as Amy and called him Ben in an effort to build rapport. And he is not an inmate, said a medical record from mid-October written by a mental health clinician at the prison. At the time, he was lucid and could carry a conversation. But over time, the records have become less about Ben the person and more about Ben the confined aggressor. But Jesus Christ, he's being confined, and he must be terrified and just fighting to get out if he doesn't, he might be in between. He might sometimes know what's going on and sometimes not. Imagine somebody with dementia and how that must feel. And I don't think schizophrenia was originally called dementia precox. I think that's what it's called. A similar name to that, if I've got that wrong. And it was because it was deemed to be a form of dementia for young people. And that is exactly what it can be like. And you think about the way you would treat an elderly person with dementia. It's a neuropsychiatric disease. This is a neuropsychiatric disease. What's the difference? The difference is that that's an elderly person and we take care of elderly people. Look what we do with young people. And I know that young people are stronger and this is like part of it, but I just feel really strongly about this sort of thing. Ben's condition has deteriorated since last fall. The most recent medical records provided to the Sun describe Ben refusing to take medication, laughing hysterically, yelling, spitting on the glass window of his cell, in other words, showing symptoms of an untreated disease. You have to be really careful how you think about this, and because you can initially think, oh my God, spitting on the glass window. This kid, he's not a kid, he's a young man. He's being controlled by his brain. He's not in control. In late October, Ben was out of his cell for recreation time when he began to swing his arms as if to hit someone, his medical record said. And that's another thing, you don't, if you only catch somebody doing something, if you don't watch the whole thing, you don't know what's going on in their brain. It might not be that he's trying to hit somebody. He was ordered back into his cell and complied, but then became aggressive, kicking the door and yelling. But as I say, please bear in mind that this would, I just can't imagine the frustration of being locked up, to be honest, when you've got a mental health issue. And it just must be horrendous. and particularly if he doesn't fully understand what's going on, or doesn't always understand. Those behaviours that were probably something that he couldn't help cost him the privilege of a daily cup of coffee and moved him to a tier that allows less free movement, which would make him more agitated probably. Not understanding what he did to deserve punishment, Ben retreated, Diane said. He hasn't left his cell since then, except to shower. Often hides in his cell and has attempted suicide there, she said. I just can't imagine how she must feel. Diane wrote letters to Governor Little and others over the past few months. Her goal is to advocate for her son's well-being, she said. My son, Ben, has been warehoused in the Idaho Security Medical Program in solitary confinement 21 out of the last 28 months without being convicted of a crime, she wrote in a message to Little earlier this year. I'm gravely concerned for my son's health, welfare and safety. He is progressively getting worse from the effects of the prison environment. Dr. Walter Campbell, the chief psychiatrist for Idaho Department of Correction, said in response to her email in early February that IDOC is well aware of Diane's concerns. There is no doubt that Ben is struggling in the prison environment in spite of our best efforts, he wrote. That being said, he has presented with security concerns that cannot be safely managed in the Idaho state hospitals, although they have attempted to manage his behaviours on several occasions. There's a catch-22, isn't there? That some people really thrive in a prison system and then they come out and they can't handle it, and they commit crimes and get up to all sorts. But then there's other people who can't handle a prison system, but if they were out, it might be a different story. I mean, if they were in the right environment, it might be a different story. This is, well, it seems it's making things worse, and it's like, well, yeah, it's like blaming somebody for where they've been put, and when really that's the problem. That obviously he's got a mental illness, but it's one thing saying that people with mental illnesses who you feel that they're unsafe in society, but we're not in the dark ages. There's like she said, he's been warehoused it's like a workhouse or something. This is insanity. I don't know if you've seen my previous video, but I've only just made that video, and I would strongly suggest that you do go and sign the petition that I put into the description. I haven't actually done it yet. I'm just about to do it now because it was still uploading when I came back to finish this video. I'm really glad that I did, actually, because this is just heartbreaking. Campbell said IDOC would be very happy to discharge him to a more therapeutic environment should the court agree to order such a placement, but the State Department that operates behavioural health care does not have the capability to manage him in their current hospital settings, and I am unaware of any alternative plans they may be developing. And yet they have mental health courts, and supposedly I'm just seeing lots of mixed messages. There's mental health courts, and I've read that information about not right environment to be in prison, but then there are people in prison. And then there's another video that you'll see with some sheriff or something from Kootenai County, basically pretty xenophobic in a way, saying that people on Washington are coming in and, you know, our drugs laws are not like your drugs laws, which, yeah, fair enough. But it's kind of like they seem to be like painting all people from Washington with the same brush. And the guy actually says, if you're found with drugs, something about if you're found with drugs or you got a drug problem or whatever, and you won't be going to a therapist, we'll be putting you straight in jail. And it feels like there seems to be like, well, the legislation says one thing, but it says a different thing from the reality of the situation. And yeah, it's strange. So apparently they don't have the capacity, well, they don't have the capability. I mean, it sounds quite damning, like they're basically blaming him for his own mental illness, suggesting that he's beyond what they would not. But, you know, there's triggers and things like uniforms, which you would see there. They're going to be they'd be a trigger. And this poor guy. And then if you listen to that other video, what they said, they're like the last person who makes, who's commented after signing the petition, what he says about guards in the prisons. Wow, I don't know what century they're living in. This is just crazy. So this was, just seeing if there's anything else. So this was, what year was this? This was this year, March 13th this year. So this is going on in 2023. I'd quite like to get in touch with Diane, to be honest. This is just tragic.